Yeah, let's start with some lighter stuff again, because election, something about the election, it's so light, right? Like it's
Yeah.
honestly it is, because like 2016, it in some ways it felt worse, in other ways this feels worse, but it's light in the sense that I think it was just kind of predictable. There are so many people that are kind of like shell shocked by it, but it's like I don't know what they were paying attention to. Like even like the pollsters, like they were so scared of being wrong. They were all like 50-50, 50-50, 50-50. So at the very least, like people should have been prepared for it. Did you have any kind of responses to people like Alan Lichtman who would have those keys to the White House? There are certain factors that have to be in place, because honestly, I am kind of sympathetic to that. I think it's unfortunate that Lichtman decided to not turn the keys appropriately. Like he said that Trump didn't have the charisma key, and it's like, well, on a relative basis, he has much more gravitas and charisma than Harris, right? He says there's no foreign policy blunders under Biden. Obviously untrue. Even if you again don't believe in foreign policy as instrumental, the fact that we have this malaise now for years, that's a problem. He said there's been
I
no.
think if I recall, he did foreign policy success and blunder. He classified
Mhm.
the situation in Palestine as a blunder, but the situation in Ukraine as a success.
Yeah, but it's
So they
you
cancel
know,
each other out.
yeah, but that's so fucking cheap. That is so, that is on par with, okay, I've run 80,000 simulations, Nate Silver, and 40,000 and 10 of them Harris wins. And it's odd because like in 2016, he obviously didn't want Trump to win, but he was very adamant, like, yeah, Trump was going to win, and this is why. And here, maybe because he saw 4 years of Trump, he really didn't want to see it again. He kind of like went against his own judgment. Oh, and he also said that there have been no scandals in the administration. And it's like, well, the most obvious thing is voters were told for 4 years that Biden was so sharp. He was sharp as a tack. And Harris obviously was part of the cover up, right? That is a major, because I mean, back in the day, maybe like somebody like Reagan could be kept in away from voters, and they're kept in the dark, but that's not really, present now. And Harris is going to, take the blame for covering it up. So, but
Yes,
like,
the president concealing a health issue to the point at which he has to be replaced at the top of the
yeah,
ticket is plausibly a major scandal.
yeah.
Also, he had both of the economic keys favoring Biden, both the short-term and long-term
Hmm.
economic keys he had favoring Biden.
Hmm.
His model didn't have any way of taking into account, 5+% inflation
Hmm.
early in the term, no longer active, but early in the term. The model had no way of processing that or factoring it in as a potential problem.
Hmm.
So it had no way of taking into account cost of living. Now, I do think that the fundamentals models can be useful and helpful in getting us to think about the situation. But if you just trust one person to be the key turning wizard who always knows how to turn the keys, and you ascribe to this person some kind of deep knowledge of how the keys should be turned, or if you make hard, fast rules about how the keys turn that make them only sensitive to very specific indicators or statistics, I think that then the fundamentals models tend to run aground. Part of the trouble is that he tried to say that that model is precisely accurate. And to do this, he defined the keys with a lot of precision, which locked him into turning them in particular ways without taking into account things that were a little bit unusual or unconventional. And I think a looser, more general theory of the keys that was framed as here's a way to think about the situation, as opposed to here's a way to know for sure what's going to happen, would have had a little bit more traction. If he allowed more people to think about how to turn the keys instead of insisting only I know how to turn the keys, only someone with a PhD knows how to turn the keys, it would have been a much more dynamic thing for people to engage with and have fun with. I think the keys theory is a fun theory if you allow lots of people to play around with it.
Hmm.
But if you recall, there was a bit where he was on Twitter debating with Nate Silver, and he said to Nate Silver, "You don't know how to turn my keys." And people were taking it out of context and
Hmm.
going, imagine two wizards having an
Yeah.
argument in a game of Dungeons
He
and
hasn't the
Dragons.
faintest idea of how to turn the keys, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
He
that's
doesn't have
the
the faintest idea.
yeah, that's the phrasing that gives it this kind of archaic sort of sheen. But yeah, I mean, like I'm sympathetic to this kind of like fundamental. I think there's obvious, it's obviously true. Like you want to look at foreign policy blunders, you want to look at like the economics, but you have to also be able to turn it appropriately. What do you think? And like also like after the fact, like when he's sort of like I'm going to take a hiatus because I want to figure out what went wrong, and he's saying stuff in interviews now like my keys don't account for the fact that there's all this fake news and the electorate is no longer rational. That is such a cop out, right? Like it is
Oh,
like
yeah.
by the keys themselves, an unpopular, disastrous incumbency was thrown out. Literally, that's exactly what the keys would predict, right? You don't. It doesn't have to be more fancy than that. That was always going for a long time. And also, like some of his, punditry in between, like he was so against the idea of Biden dropping out. Now we know, like internal polls from Democrats pointed to 400 plus electoral vote loss for Biden had he stayed in the race. The pollsters are the most accurate, like Atlas. They were very adamant that once Biden dropped out, the whole nature of the race changed, like in favor of Democrats. It wasn't enough, but it did change positively. Think about it, like he saw what happens during the debate. He sees how everybody's pushing him out. He knows that donors are ready to just like turn up the spigot, and yet he's so married to the keys as they're written that he's not willing to say that a different, nominee other than the incumbent would work. Right. He's not willing to do that because he's so like keyed into the keys. Right. There's no other way out. And that makes the system kind of useless, I think, in my view.
Yeah, it's interesting. He argues not that he had individually a lapse in his impartiality and reasonableness in the way he turned the keys, but that the public
Hmm.
lapsed in its reasonableness,
Hmm.
in its response to the keys. So even in his, I have to go away and think about what went wrong, he is still insisting
Hmm.
that he turned the keys correctly, and it's the public which is being unreasonable or has lost the ability to be a rational actor or what have you. I think also this is a common issue in social science theories, this very hard, sharp distinction. Either the public is rational or it's not. And if it's rational, then it always does what my theory says that it should do. And if it's not rational, then it's a total free for all. Nobody can predict
Hmm.
anything. And what's the point of trying? And this very on or off way of thinking about theories and models makes it really difficult to take into account complexity and to
Hmm.
have a theory of how do people respond to a specific kind of situation, right? One of the things we know is that people tend to be more responsive to an economic problem that they're currently experiencing versus one they experienced in the past. Now, you could say, well, that's myopia. And some political scientists do say that, voters are myopic. They only pay attention to the economic conditions in the 6 months, 9 months before the election. But that's not strictly speaking true. It's just that they tend to weight things a little differently if it's occurred longer ago. And there might be good reasons for thinking that things that happened 3 years ago are less important. And the funny thing is that it's the Democrats now who think that what happened 3 or 4 years ago in the economy shouldn't be important now. Whereas a few years ago, that it was mainly Democratic leaning social scientists who were writing about voter myopia as a symptom of voters not caring about the economy from earlier in the term.